Hello and welcome to our quick Photoshop tutorial on how to touch up and edit your digital files. We are going to be working on removing this large tear as well as fixing some other small blemishes that you can see here in these colored squares. We're mainly going to be doing this with the clone stamp tool and possibly the healing brush. But before we do any editing, the first step that you should do is to duplicate your layer. So we're going down here, it might be called background like it is here, or it might be called layer 1, or you might have a specific name for it. Regardless, you right click and you hit duplicate layer. Now you can name it whatever you'd like, and then you hit OK. And the main reason we're doing this is just in case we accidentally saved our file, we have something to go back to. So now let's get started, and we will zoom in to the area that we're going to be working on, which is that large tear. And you can see it is it's quite a bad rip, and there's some stress cracks going through this area as well. So we're going to be fixing all of that up. So let's get started. So I'm going to click on my clone stamp tool. And the way the clone stamp tool works is you hold down Alt on a Windows keyboard, and I believe it's Option on a Mac, and you'll see this bullseye looking cursor. You're going to click in an area, and now wherever I draw or paint with my brush, I'm going to be duplicating or cloning from where that bullseye cursor was. And you'll see once I start to paint, that X appears, and everywhere that touches, I'm simply copying it to where my brush is. And it's a really handy tool, but you do have to be careful and keep an eye on where that X is, because if you get too close to other areas, you can see how you can quickly ruin your progress and ruin your work by accidentally hitting things that you don't want to hit. So I am going to undo those changes. A quick shortcut for that on the Windows computer is Control Z, and everything goes back to how it was. And now I'm going to do Alt again, and we're going to get started on fixing this tear. So the other thing you want to keep in mind when using the clone stamp tool is to constantly be readjusting where you are cloning from. And you can see I've done that about 4 times already. You're just stopping your work and hitting Alt and clicking on where you want to clone from. And you can see there's this large kind of blown out area without any texture. I'm actually going to add some texture back into that. And you can see it's quite easy with this tool. And now when we zoom out, it won't look all white and blotchy. It will blend in much nicer. The other thing to keep in mind is to be using the appropriate brush size for the area that you're working on. This is a pretty decent sized brush for this type of editing, but if you do need to increase it or decrease it, that's done up here. And then this is called your hardness. And I can show you what that does right now. So it's set at 0. And let's click down into this magenta. You see how hazy that circle is? That is at 0 hardness. If I go all the way up to 100, now it is a crisp circle. So it depends on the type of work you're doing. I normally start off at the 0. It makes things blend nicer. But for instance, when we start doing this hairline here, we will probably up the hardness. So I'm going to Control Z and get rid of those 2 things and bring my hardness back down to 0 and keep going with this editing. You'll also see that I'm kind of getting into the hairline a little bit. That's okay, because we're going to fix that separately once we're done with the white areas. And again, constantly sampling where we're going to be cloning from. That's very important, because you don't want to be hitting things you're not intending to duplicate and clone. So again, I'm just getting rid of some of these hairline cracks that were caused by that tear. And in this area, I'm going to shrink my brush down in diameter, probably not that small, and get this crack right there. And then I'm going to even everything out so you can never tell we fixed it. Now let's work on this hairline. I'm going to bump my brush back up and let's see what this looks like. You can see here that it's kind of a hazy line right there. We want it a little crisper, so I'm going to undo that. I'm going to bump my hardness up to about 50, and we're going to start over and make it nice and uniform. Now let's move on to, actually I can see there's kind of a white area here, so let's smooth that out. Let's move on to this maroon square. This is going to be probably the hardest part of this whole fix, simply because we need to get a nice crisp corner here, and using a circle brush that is a little bit difficult. So what I'm actually going to do is show you another quick trick, and this especially works well with this image because it's made up of same sized squares all throughout. So I'm going to click on the magic wand tool and click on this red square, and you can see how it is only selecting this red area. Now I can move this, just the selected area, over to the maroon square, line it up with where I want it to be, and when I go back to my clone tool, since I've selected an area, this will not allow me to paint outside the lines. So you can see it's creating a nice crisp line, and I don't have to worry about being super careful. I'm going to leave this edge because that was actually fine. I'm going to go up here, and now I'm going to deselect this by hitting Control D, and you can see that it's a much nicer line than we would have been able to do. It's actually a little bit too crisp, so what I'm going to do is go to my blur, which is right here, and turn my strength down to maybe 20 or so. And I'm just going to do a straight line down here to try to make that not such a jagged edge. Maybe I'll bump my strength up a bit. And again, we want it to kind of look like these other lines, which are not quite sharp. Let's put the strength to 100 and see how that goes. There we go, that's doing it. All right, so now when we zoom out of this area, it should look like that tear never happened. And that's looking pretty nice. So let's work on some of these other small blemishes. And again, it's going to be a lot of the same techniques. We're going to use the clone brush. I'm going to turn my hardness down to 0. I'm going to hit Alt, and now I'm going to cover up those areas. Alt, cover up this area. Again, I'm watching and readjusting when my X is getting close to another color. And it's pretty much that easy. Sometimes you will see a definite area that we cloned onto. It doesn't blend in as nicely as we'd like. That's when this healing brush tool comes in handy. So we can use this healing brush tool, and basically this kind of blends everything together, but the downside of it is if I was working really close to these two really opposite colors, you'll see what happens here. So if I'm blending right this area, it's taking a sampling of everything around it and it averages it out, and you can see that it creates that kind of ghost area, and that's because it takes a sampling from this white. So the healing stamp tool is really nice, but you need to be careful of when you use it. I tend to use the clone tool and only use the healing tool if needed. On a project like this, the clone tool is all you need. So again, we're just getting rid of all these blemishes, and once we zoom out, you won't ever be able to tell where they were. Oh, you can see I just made a mistake there. Control Z. There we go. So let's zoom out a bit, see if there's any other issues we should take care of, and there are. So again, zooming into the area that we're working on so we can get a nice look at it. And I'm just simply getting rid of, Control Z. And again, it shows you how easy it is to lose track of where that X cursor is. You always need to be watching it and be prepared to undo any changes. So we can get rid of this area down here. This area there, this little dark guy. And I think we are about done. On an image like this, you could kind of go for days doing this, but you just need to eventually call it quits. So let's zoom out and take a look at what we've done. And the nice thing about duplicating that layer is now I can turn it on and off, and we can see exactly what we did. So let's get a nice close-up and off. You can see the tear, all these blemishes here, and on. Everything looks nice and fixed. So there we are. Hope you enjoyed this quick Photoshop tutorial on how to touch up and edit your images. Make sure to subscribe and tune back in for more quick Photoshop help and other helpful hints and tricks.